black from dust but still alive and red in the center. It reminded me of Haji Murad. It makes me want to write. It asserts life to the end and alone in the midst of the whole field, somehow or other, had asserted it. Leo Tolstoy. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I am your host. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this week. I'd really appreciate you coming out. January is done. We've moved on to February, and still getting pretty good download numbers despite me not having put out an episode this month so far. So glad to see that the episodes are continuing to do strong into the week. I do want to also apologize. Last week I forgot to edit the clap sync that I put in at the start of the episodes. I'm going to try to make sure to do that again, just in case, or not do that again, I should say, excuse me. I'm going to try to, keep clearing that out as I normally do, but I completely forgot last time, so I do apologize for that. And it wasn't until after I had already set everything up to render and publish that I noticed it. So, also, I did put up some pictures of Proso and Foxtail Millet on the Twitter account, where I weekly I kind of post the links, usually on Wednesdays, to the current week's episode. And I try to remember to attach pictures and stuff. And this week I actually remembered to place photographs of the difference between Proso millet and Foxtail millet, and it is very noticeable once you actually look at them. But yeah, I think that's kind of everything I have. We should finish up East Asian domesticates today and Southeast Asian domesticates today, and then next week we'll move on to Europe. And I think there's one or two in North America. And then we'll move on to South America. Not to kind of, give less focus on Europe or North America, but neither of them has crops. Or excuse me, Europe has some crops that are domesticated there, but that's usually not till later, and at this point there's still a limited number of domesticates arising in Europe in terms of plants, at least this season. There's some other stuff that'll come around later, but as far as I could tell, there's only one crop that could kind of be placed in the domestication sphere in Europe this season. So so next week we'll have I think one crop in Europe, and then we'll move on to North America, and depending on how long that takes, we might move on to South America too. But at least 2 episodes for the Americas is what I'm thinking right now, and then we'll move on to plants, and then we'll do some more of the kind of scene setting for the current season. And then, of course, we will delve back into history and progression and all that kind of stuff. So, anyway, let's go ahead and get started. And to do that, we're going to start with bananas, the fruit that I know many of us are very familiar with. Now, the word banana came into English from either Portuguese or Spanish. It's debated which of the two. Where they adopted the word from is not known, and I mean they when I say Portuguese and Spanish. Where they got it from, we don't know 100%, but most sources I've been able to read say that they probably adopted it from the Wolof language, and the word banana is the word that they would have adapted from Wolof. Now, there is a debate about this word. It could be the word that their ancestors developed, the Wolof ancestors, and they inherited that word for both the plant and its fruit. Though there are people who claim that they got the word from the Arabic word banan, which means fingertip. That said, the first banana was not domesticated by any of these people in any of those places. From what we can determine from current genetic evidence, the first domesticated bananas emerged somewhere between 8,000 and 5,000 BCE. And archaeological evidence suggests that this happened somewhere in what is now Papua New Guinea, in a place known as the Cook Valley or Cook Swamp. Now, I think that is KUK if you'd like to Google it. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, I think I brought up before when talking about New Guinea, but it has over 800 languages on the island, so determining what the original name was is not really possible. But some words used by natives there today are po, potera, mudu, and muku. And it is the last two whose name spread west with the plant, where by the time it reached the Arabs, it was called mauz, the fruit of which would have formerly been called banan al-Muaz, or the Muaz finger, or the finger of the Muaz. Mauz was the base for the Greek term, and the Romans got their word musa from them. Musa is the genus for bananas and plantain plants and trees. So that also ties into, if the Wolof people did adopt the Arabic term, they would have heard Banan al-Muaz and just shortened it to Banan. Again, all that is very highly debated. Now, there are between 80 and 90 different musa plants that produce either bananas or plantains. And in most places in the world, they don't really distinguish between the two fruits. At least, at like a individual level, like, buying them from shops or traders or what have you. Now, the first domesticated bananas were probably not the most appealing thing in the world to eat. They're fairly dry for fruit, and they would be packed with extremely large, hard seeds. And the plants that were domesticated, that we get closer to what we expect from modern bananas, were, you still have their wild ancestors hanging about. Things like the Musa balbasiana, which you can Google pictures of. It's green mostly, and you cut it open, and it's just packed with all these kind of like yellowish clear seeds. There's some others that have, larger kind of black seeds that are kind of spread throughout. Now, over time and with crossbreeding, various wild strains, they were able to make plants that were producing much smaller seeds. And eventually, this is much further down the line, they were able to make hybrids that produce no seeds at all in their fruit. And I'm not going to go into detail on this because it's more of a biological, topic. But if you're interested, you can read how these hybrids are spread via their tree suckers. Because again, the fruits of the banana tree, typically, if they don't have seeds, they can't reproduce. So how do you make more trees? They kind of use I think it's a grafting method, is from what I was able to tell. But again, if you're interested in that, I highly recommend looking it up. Now, bananas travel better than a lot of fruits, as you might imagine. And as you pick them, you can pick them when they're still, not necessarily the ripest you'd like. You can then carry them, and they'll slowly age, and this helps the plant spread. And even if you leave them too long without, eating them, you can still kind of use them for cooking and prepare them to kind of maybe counteract some of the going bad effects of it, I guess. So they're great food for longer journeys, and that's going to help them spread at several periods. Now, I mentioned that the first domestication took place on Papua New Guinea, but several different wild musa plants grow throughout all of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, I think parts of kind of like the northern Australia coast, as well as places in, I think the kind of the tropical parts of India, like towards the north east and the far south. So all these places have these wild plants that you could domesticate strains of bananas from. And these wild strains would be interbred with domesticated strains at various points to create new varieties as well. But there are also cases where some domesticated strains grew out of control. Maybe the seeds got left behind. Maybe, someone planted the new trees and then left and then never came back, and the domesticated strains became wild again. And then later, other humans came around, took control of the plants, and then redomesticated them. And from what we can tell, genetically speaking, that this probably happened at several places and at a few different times. Though there are disagreements on the kind of exact timing of some of these events. There's a debate on when the crop reached Africa and the northwestern portion of the Indian subcontinent. In some cases, those disagreements, there's a discrepancy of thousands of years in certain situations. I couldn't get enough information to really give a definitive opinion on one way or the other. I do think, probably not thousands of years in India's case. I think the older dates are probably more accurate. Bananas are, a fairly important fruit there. And it's also, they have also got like a very strong religious connotation for some of their gods. So probably we've been in India a lot longer, I think, even than the archaeology might suggest. In Africa, though, I don't know if the older dates, were like 2,000 or 3,000 years, 4,000 years. Some of those might be a little extreme. I do think it's been in Africa longer than like the commonly accepted, like 600s AD. I think they've probably been there a little bit longer than that. But also, I think, I know that Africa has encinte plants, which look extremely similar to a lot of plantains. They are called false bananas. And I think they were considered plantains and bananas until like the 1940s. So even if bananas themselves didn't reach Africa until much later, various groups in Africa have been growing those encinte plants for quite a while. In fact, I think I mentioned them in the African agricultural episode, where they may be even being started domestication at this point in time, and then definitely in next season. So make of that what you will. The trees on the for bananas they have kind of a wide range in terms of sizing. They can grow as high as 30 feet for some varieties, and then there are those that can double that. They can get up to 60 feet, and that's 9 meters or 18 meters, depending on if you use metric system or not. And again, the species vary wildly in terms of heights, but as far as I could see, there was nothing that grows smaller than 9 meters, and nothing that grows taller than 18 meters. I think that's kind of all we can say about the bananas for right now. Obviously, we're all familiar with the Cavendish banana. Those are the yellow ones. That's what most of us here in America would think of when we think of bananas. But there are plenty of other varieties as well. The next crops we're going to discuss were all domesticated around somewhere between 7,000 and 6,000 BCE. And this happens in various parts of East Asia. The first of these we're going to talk about is the water chestnut, or the Chinese water chestnut. Now, the name for this is a combination of water, which comes from the Old English water, from the Proto-Germanic water, also possibly an Old Saxon word watar, which is all from the I think it's the Old High Germanic wazar, which is from Proto-Indo-European, wad or, and also, so you combine water with chestnut, which comes into English. Originally it was Middle English, chestine, from the Old French chastain, which is itself from the Latin castania, and that came from the Greek castanea. In Chinese, they're called either biji or mati. Mati is a slightly older word, a slightly newer word, and it basically like horse hooves. That's kind of what they call the not the fruit, but the vegetable, the crumb of the plant. But the older word for it in Chinese is bati, and I believe that specifically refers to the plant. It's not a nickname. That's what it actually is called. But in English or a lot of European places, you'll see it referred to as Chinese water chestnuts or just water chestnuts. Now, that being said, they're not actually nuts. They are vegetables, and they're grown in patties like rice. They're popular in a lot of East Asian cuisine in several countries because they mix very well with a lot of different ingredients. They do have a nutty flavor despite not being nuts. Also, I believe if you let them kind of over ripen, they will have like a sweeter flavor. The longer you let them, you let them age, essentially. I think a lot of places in southern China, like Cantonese cooking, they'll be added to meatballs. You have them in Thai, where they're actually used, I think, as kind of a dessert. They have one of the sweeter varieties that they use. So a lot of different uses for these plants. And part of the reason I included them, despite them not being necessarily the most important crop in at least American cuisine or even European cuisine, they are extremely popular pretty much worldwide. I think there are places in Africa where they were transported to. A lot of places in Oceania use similar plants. So it's an extremely important crop, even if we're not aware of it as much here in North America, South America, or Western Europe. Next, we're going to move on to a plant that's not really necessarily a foodstuff, at least nearly. It's not as important for a foodstuff variety as the other stuff we've been talking about, and that is perilla or perilla. Now, for the life of me, I could not get a definitive answer on where perilla comes from, at least in terms of like the etymology. There are those that link it with parilla, which is a combination of think little vine, para, like grapevine. It's like a diminutive of that. Other places say that it comes from a word in Spanish that means knob, or it might be a diminutive of pera, which is pear. But then I think Webster's actually had that it was that the taxonym, the scientific name, originally came from Ovid, the poet. He addressed some of his works to a perilla there, and whether that was a real name or a pseudonym, no one really knows. But Ovid, a lot of his poetry has to do with, not necessarily have to do with it, but a lot of it features different plants, flowers, trees, that kind of thing. So, could not get a definitive name or a breakdown of the name, at least in English. Now, in Chinese, it's called zici, and this is one of the big, traditional Chinese medicine herbs. Now, there are many varieties of perilla. Some of them are still wild and basically considered weeds, but kind of the diversity of perilla makes it very, very useful, very widespread. And there are different varieties that are pervasive, are endemic to a couple of different locations. So it's kind of spread out through a lot of different parts of Asia. Again, I mentioned it was a herb. It is related to, I think, mint. I think technically it's a mint, though not quite as refreshing as what we're familiar with when it comes to taste, when it comes to mint. And I mentioned it was used in medicine. It is, but it can also, its seeds can be used to make kind of an oil, a vegetable oil. And that has a kind of its own distinct taste. And I think it's used a lot in Korean cuisine, the oil is. And they also use it in Japanese and Vietnamese cooking. It's fairly well widespread, mostly in East Asia because, again, of the traditional uses of medicine. But it has been used outside, at least more recently. So, yeah, fairly important crop. Again, not necessarily grown for its just as a food source. It's used more for its byproducts than anything else. At least these days, it's more of a garnish or an additive as opposed to like a true food source. But again, the reason I'm including it is because it is something that doesn't necessarily fall into our regular concept of crops being domesticated in the West here, but it also shows that they are that people that are growing it, they're growing it for a reason, despite the fact that it is very similar to a weed. They're putting time and effort, resources into growing this crop that is not, again, it's not something that you can eat and live off of in and of itself. It has to be added to other things. So they're beginning to branch out. This is a sign, again, of that kind of secondary products revolution. And it's showing that it is spreading to other places aside from just Mesopotamia. So again, part of the reason I included it here in this episode. Now next we have Arctium, or also burdock as another term for it. The quote that I included at the start of this episode from Tolstoy, he is talking about a variety of burdock that you would find in Russia. And burdock, Arctium, various different varieties of it are all native to not only Asia, but Europe as well. There are native varieties in Europe. They are domesticated in Europe, though that happens again at a later period. So the earliest domesticated strains are all found in Asia. Now, the name for burdock is a combination of bur and dock in English. And dock used to have a couple of different meanings in English. This one is from the Old English daka, which is from the Proto-Germanic dakon, and it literally meant like a bundle of whatever. Usually in this case it meant like weeds. And burr, of course, comes from a I think it's Scandinavian initially, but essentially it is just like it's a prickly seed, like a sharp seed, like you've got a burr in your pants or something like that, or stuck in your foot. So it's a combination of burr and dock. The Latin name Artium, I think, is just it's just the scientific name. I wasn't able to really kind of come up with why it was named that, but burdock is what you would call it in Old English, I guess. And again, spread all throughout Asia. You don't really eat the I guess the greenage on this. You eat more of the roots. The tap roots are what are important. In fact, it was much more widespread in the past. I mentioned Tolstoy, but you would find tap roots much more widespread in European cuisine prior, I think it's to the 1800s. It's kind of fallen out of favor in terms of part of like regular cooking ingredients here in Europe and in the West. But still, again, very important in East Asian cuisine. And I also believe that some of the oil and the seeds from the leaves and things like that can be used as a medicine as well. So, like perilla, it is not just a foodstuff; it is also a medicinal plant as well. Though it has more uses than perilla does in terms of food. You basically use the things you don't eat, you can use for medicinal purposes. Although I think if you accidentally eat some parts of the burdock, it can lead to like a really bad skin rash if you're not careful. And this is way, way, way down the line, but burdock is kind of the inspiration for Velcro. Kind of the hooks and the little loops. Burdock is the plant that, I forget the guy's name, Mestral, I think is the kind of the inspiration, or the guy who was inspired by Velcro. He kind of got the inspiration from looking at wild burdock. I forget which variety it was, but there are a few different ones. And again, all spread out, all native, all over Europe and northern and eastern Asia. And it again was being domesticated somewhere towards the end of last season, the beginning of this season. Kind of hard to narrow down. And for all these crops, it is hard to get a 100% definitive answer on when they were first domesticated and where. Part of it is due to research. It's kind of hard to trace this kind of thing. Also, part of it is likely due to the fact that there were probably several different groups all growing it, or growing these three varieties of crops at around the same time. Who knows? In a couple of years, they may decide to switch from studying rice to these three, but I doubt it. Bigger crops get the higher level of focus in terms of funding and that kind of thing. But I believe that finishes us up for Asia, at least for this season. Like I said, we'll go over the 1 or 2 crops I could find in in Europe, and then we'll move on to the Americas after that. But yeah, thank you all for joining me. I hope you kind of got my reasonings why I talked about these crops. I know that they're probably not something that we would necessarily consider, but I just want to kind of go over what things are being grown and why. Doesn't really matter where they're being grown, honestly. But if you guys have anything I missed, let me know. I'm sure that there are some crops that might be kind of in this range. Someone had asked me about garlic. That is actually not being domesticated just yet. That is something that will begin to happen next season. Although maybe some wild varieties, you're starting to see it at the very, very, very tail end of this season. Yeah, no, garlic won't show up next until the next season, when that gets domesticated. But yeah, thank you all for joining me. I hope you have learned something, if nothing else. If you have any questions, feedback, or otherwise, please let me know. You can contact me at waradrevpod@gmail.com. You can send me a direct message via Twitter. My DMs are open there. Again, I also try to post pictures. I may retweet other like history or scientist stuff I find it interesting. You may just see some random funny stuff that I find. You can also comment on any of my YouTube videos. You can come by my live stream on YouTube. I do stream very regularly, usually during the week, sometimes not so much on the weekends, but that kind of depends if I'm traveling or not. But yeah, any of those places you're welcome to drop by, leave a comment, send a message, whatever you'd like. So yeah, thank you all for joining me. I hope you have a good rest of your day whenever you're listening to this, and a good rest of your week. Thank you all. Goodbye.